Today's show is sponsored by Datadog. Start monitoring EC2, RDS, ECS, and all your other AWS services in minutes with Datadog. Whether you have 10 instances or 10,000, Datadog automatically tracks hosts as you scale. Visualize metrics, automatically alert on anomalies, and collaborate across teams to quickly troubleshoot issues before they escalate. Give it a try with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast, and Datadog will send you a comfy, complimentary t-shirt. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well as we continue to roll through November 2020. The U.S. elections are, I think, 99% complete. For the most part, most of the world has accepted the results of those, although there are still some stragglers. We talked last week that we hopefully would know by this week whether or not we were going to have, continued sort of a little bit of chaos, if you will, or we'd have a little bit of sanity. I think we're moving a little more towards the sanity side of the scale, but still a long way to go before we see any sort of real transitions. It was good news. We did see some interesting news about some vaccines starting to have some very, very positive test results. So, we may beginning to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of this pandemic. Hopefully, the scientists are doing their job, the doctors are doing their job, and fingers crossed these new drugs and vaccines are going to do their job. So, with that, there was not a lot of tech news this week per se. Apple had their event, and if you're really into consumer Apple MacBooks and chips and so forth, check out Daring Fireball, or the folks over at Software Defined Talk like to cover those things. We don't cover a whole lot of that. There is some new MacBooks, great. I do want to talk about a couple of things here on Cloud News of the Week because it is a little bit of a slower news week, but I thought there was a couple of interesting data points that kind of hit on some trends that we've been highlighting throughout the year and something that we're kind of tracking as we go along. The first one was Microsoft and Datadog announced what they're calling a native integration partnership. So obviously, as you know, if you listen to the show at all, Datadog's been a great partner of ours for a long time, sponsor of the show. But I highlight this one because this is interesting because Datadog has forever been a SaaS offering. They've done very, very well. I've never really had an on-premises offering. And you could work with their product whether your application ran in AWS or Azure or anywhere else. But in essence, it was a Datadog sort of service that happened to run on top of those cloud providers, right? And what this really does is, and this is a little bit of a trend that's beginning to happen, that service is now going to become a native part of Azure. And what this means is that it will be in the Azure console, it will be in the Azure GUI, it will be part of Azure billing. And, we've seen a couple of these things happen. So my company, Red Hat, has done this with our OpenShift offering. It's called Azure Red Hat OpenShift. There are a few others in there. VMware has sort of a relationship with Azure that's sort of similar to this. But I think we're going to begin to see this trend where more and more of some of the software or SaaS services, whatever the delivery mechanism is, start to become native in these cloud providers. And I think we'll begin to see this more and more in 2021. People like the core technology, but they want it to be part of the billing mechanism or the IDM mechanism or whatever it is that's a little more closely tied to those cloud providers. It doesn't mean that you can't use the technology in other cloud providers as well, but we are seeing a little more of this happen. So interesting to see that happen last week. The second one that I thought was interesting was Snowflake launched Snowflake Ventures. And this is not unusual. So as companies get bigger, their stock does well. They have cash that gets thrown off in the business. They're looking for ways to not only acquire companies over time, which lots of companies do, but they also become their own investment arm. So obviously, a company like Snowflake, who has such a foundational technology in data that runs across lots of clouds, we're beginning to see other companies start to build natively on top of Snowflake. We talked about Observe, who, our friend Jeremy Burton, CEO over at, building on top of Snowflake. I think we'll see other companies doing that as well. So in essence, thinking about that part of the stack is somewhat solved in the cloud. Companies will build on top of this, and it allows Snowflake to begin going and making investments in those companies. So, kind of becoming a VC as well as being a vendor as well. So also an interesting thing. I think Snowflake's in an interesting position. At some point, we will get them on to deep dive a little bit more about their technologies. But just a couple of more data points around these trends that we're beginning to see, where some of the cloud native technologies, only cloud technologies, are becoming more prevalent, and also cloud natively integrated technologies becoming more prevalent. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to have an interesting conversation, a topic we haven't talked about in a while, but is always very, very relevant because it has a ton of gravity in enterprises. We're going to talk a little bit about how we get SAP into the cloud, or the transition from SAP on-premises into the cloud, and how that's evolved over the last few years. So we're going to get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Fauna. Fauna is the data API for modern applications. As application architectures evolve to embrace cloud APIs and microservices, you need a database that is always correct, always fast, and always secure. But you don't want to spend valuable time managing your database. Fauna modernizes your OLTP infrastructure by providing a 100% operations-free database without compromising on the capabilities needed for building industrial-grade enterprise applications. Whether you're building new microservices or augmenting existing services applications, FaunaDB lets you simplify code, reduce costs, and ship faster. Fauna is a Jepsen-verified, globally distributed OLTP database delivered as an API that works with the programming language of your choice. To learn more, visit fauna.com/cloudcast to try it for free. That's fauna.com/cloudcast to learn more and try it for free. Today's show is sponsored by Cloud Academy. Listen up, y'all. This is a great offer. With everyone using the same cloud platforms, winning and losing comes down to having the best talent to build products better and faster. Cloud Academy is the training platform of choice for Fortune 500 companies and thousands of tech professionals around the world. Thousands of video courses, learning paths, practical hands-on labs in real-world cloud environments, Cloud Academy has tools designed to help teams assess, build, and validate critical cloud skills. Most importantly, Cloud Academy stays agile, challenging you with new content, labs, and tons of features that ensure your skills stay relevant and everyone can level up. They cover everything from cloud certifications to DevOps to security to programming languages. You can get started now at cloudacademy.com. For a limited time, Cloudcast listeners can lock in 50% off the monthly price for life. Just put in the coupon code CLOUDCAST at checkout. It's a great way to pursue certifications or just build cloud expertise. Again, that's cloudacademy.com, and use the coupon code CLOUDCAST to lock in 50% off the monthly price. And we're back. And folks, while we talk a lot about, what is happening in cloud native and something that might be totally brand new, at the end of the day, we tend to focus very much on enterprise technologies, things that companies are using to make their business better, whether they're mid-sized businesses, large businesses, government businesses around the world. And one of the topics that we don't talk a lot about, but really is a huge part of many, many companies' business from a technology perspective, is SAP. And, we've seen over the years, I had some experience working kind of directly with some of that, but we've seen more and more SAP begin to move to the cloud in different forms and fashions. And we thought we really should come back to that and really kind of dig into what's going on in that world. We haven't touched on it in a couple of years. And so very excited to have Eamonn O'Neill, who is founder and executive vice president at Lemongrass Cloud. Eamonn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the world of SAP has really evolved a lot, over the last, I'll say 10 years. It's evolved a lot over the last, 20 plus years. But before we dive into that, because that's, an area that you focus a ton on, give us a little bit about your background, kind of what got you interested in this space, involved with this space, and then obviously what led you to go start and lead Lemongrass.
Sure. I started in the SAP space back in the early 90s. So I've been around for quite a while. And throughout that whole experience, it was quite clear to me that there were always opportunities to run SAP projects more quickly, more cheaply, and ultimately get to value more quickly. That was always the thing that drove me. And when we started Lemongrass back in 2008, the objective was really more of that, was how can we bring other technologies to SAP customers in a way that they could get the value quicker. At that time there were quite a few nascent ideas, if you like, in the market. I mean, mobile was quite prevalent. Enterprise mobile was certainly considered a potential big impact area. Identity management was something else we looked at. And this new word cloud was being kicked around as well back in 2008. So we sort of worked with all three to try and figure out what had the most legs fundamentally.
Sure.
But within a couple of years, it was pretty quick. We began to recognize that the potential of cloud was a lot more than what we understood it to be back then, which is just effectively low-cost infrastructure.
Right.
We began to recognize the automation opportunities of cloud were actually way more valuable than necessarily the price point. And at that stage as well, AWS, Amazon Web Services, were actually the only ones who were really defining cloud in that direction.
Right.
Fully automated, as well as obviously price leaders. So it was around that time, 2010 or so, we began to, as it were, bet the shop on AWS. And while it was we still had a lot of SAP customers quite puzzled at the idea that you would put something as important as an SAP system on public infrastructure. We really believed in it, and we really thought that this would be inevitable. So that's fundamentally how we got into the area, and that's still what we do today.
Yeah. Yeah, SAP has been, as I said, it's been an interesting company to watch. The whole ecosystem around it's been very interesting. I know probably a decade or so ago, I was sort of loosely involved with that community. I was down in Orlando for their event. They were launching HANA, which was this massive bet on a next generation super scalable database, and that was the focus of it. It was it was their founder talking about it, and since then. That's obviously still a big focus, but they've made just a ton of acquisitions, right? A lot of things in SaaS, so things like SuccessFactors and Concur and Hipmonk and Qualtrics, and it's gotten beyond just sort of what the ERP does. If somebody was sort of going like, hey, what is SAP anymore, right? We knew them as the ERP company, but now they're not just on-prem, they're SaaS, they're other things like. What is their relationship with customers, and how do you see that sort of evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting period for SAP, the last 10 years or so. I think, first off, ERP is still critical. It's still the number one product in their suite, and it always will be, both in the eyes of SAP and the customers. I think SAP, of course, had to demonstrate some sort of commitment to SaaS and a SaaS strategy. There's no doubt, people like Salesforce and ServiceNow were demonstrating what SaaS really meant. And SAP, of course, being technology leaders, had to demonstrate to their shareholders as well, what does that really mean for them? So a lot of these were best of breed products that were in the market. SAP, clearly saw value, which was clearly there. But the SAP was never really impacted, or the ERP systems were never really impacted by those acquisitions. They were, in many ways, bolt-ons to extending the footprint, if you like, of SAP within a customer landscape. And with ERP, SAP had a real kind of head-scratcher challenge, because on one hand, the obvious thing to do is, well, just turn into a SaaS offering. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it's incredibly difficult to do that.
They're so customized.
Well, that's it. I mean, the very thing that customers love about SAP's ERP solution is that it's extendable, very extendable. And pretty much every customer who implements the ERP solution has done that. And they've done it to great value. I mean, of course it gets a bad name when you customize something because of the cost of maintenance of that thing. But you can't forget the value it adds.
Right.
So when you look at a large enterprise, they will have thousands of modifications that, at the time, certainly of implementation, all made sense, all would have been justifiable, and all which still work today. But when you try to bring that into a multi-tenant environment, you've got a real conundrum. So you either have to remove all of that customization and move into something that's much more simplified and templated, or you have to re-architect pretty much entirely the way that ERP solution works. Now, both of those are almost like almost so far away from the installed base of SAP today that it's a very, very difficult proposition to get to. So what we see is, and this is one of the really interesting discussions we're seeing today with customers, is that when they look at what they do next with their ERP solution, if they look at SAP generally, of course, there's those SaaS offerings which we talked about are pretty obvious things that they can move to. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the ERP, the core system, the thing that really runs their business, they've got a lot of options on the table today, possibly too many options. And this is one of the questions is, they can run ECC today on their Oracle DB or SQL Server. They can move to ECC on HANA, which is supported, and they can run that. They can switch to S4 on-premise. They can switch to S4 on hyperscaler. They can run an S4 single-tenant SaaS, or they can run an S4 multi-tenant SaaS. Of course, each one of those has got pros and cons. But when a customer who's been an SAP customer for 30 years, every couple of years it was a very simple version upgrade. Yep. Now they're looking at potentially 6 different next steps that they should be considering. So I think that's one of the challenges customers have is, what am I meant to do with ERP next? And one of the things that we've been working with customers on is, well, how do you get a roadmap to S4, not just in a time frame that makes sense for your business, but on an architecture that's future-proof, but also won't leave you in a cul-de-sac somewhere with unmanageable code sets.
Right.
It's a really interesting challenge for customers at the minute.
Yeah, and ERP systems and SAP systems were always the place where CIOs either made their career or they did something for a long time and then just sort of went away because the thing got so unruly and they couldn't deal with it anymore. So it's sort of a make or break thing. So yeah, if the path forward is 6 different options, I can imagine the question they all ask is, well, that's great, but like, which one's going to be successful, right? Which one's not going to break the bank? Which one's actually going to be successful? That maybe, like you said, too many options. So I want to focus a little bit on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Lemongrass is focused on getting SAP into the cloud, helping customers with that migration and the evolution that goes along with it. So like, what's the driver? What do you find is the biggest driver for people to say, hey, step one, we're open to this idea of moving things to the cloud, right? Is it just the technology's updated, we want to update, or are there tend to be certain business drivers that are the motivator to not only think about it, but then engage with Lemongrass?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of both, of course. There's always a mix, I guess. I think what we tend to see is the reasons people move to cloud should of course reflect the benefits they're trying to achieve, right? That's sort of should be a 1-to-1 match. And what we try to do is phrase that I think again, back to what customers are actually wrestling with is, what are my selection criteria? Like, how do I evaluate what I'm meant to do here? And what cloud should I move to as well? So what we show customers is, well, what are the benefits other people have achieved? Mm-hmm. And because what we do recognize, if you haven't used cloud much, and I specifically talk about IaaS, like AWS or competitor equivalents, if you haven't used it much, it can actually be confusing.
Sure.
And there are things that sometimes you have to just use it for a while to actually understand it. Simple as that.
Right.
And so what we try to do is show, look, you need to look at what other people have learned and try to arrange your selection criteria. And we boil it down to 4 areas, right? 4 key areas. So one is, business case, right? The obvious costs. Nothing happens in an enterprise without a decent business case, of course.
Right.
So people expect to see cost reductions. And of course, we do see that. And anywhere from 40 to 70% cost savings. So there's some material savings that can be achieved, really quickly. It becomes, even in itself, it's a bit of a no-brainer. That in itself is a large reason why customers, especially today, are looking at hyperscaler going, why aren't we doing this? Mm-hmm. But one of the things I kind of tell them about as well is, look, there's a couple of things you need to bear in mind when you're looking at pricing. One is, This is variable pricing. This is pay as you go, which is really great if you know how to manage it.
Right.
If you don't know how to manage it, you can get some surprises. So there's a whole new discipline called, we call it FinOps or financial operations, of how you manage a large variable spend. So, every time, you build a new system, and as techies, we all call that provisioning the system. Well, actually, it's not, you're actually procuring more hardware. So procurement is involved in every single technical step that you're executing. That's a brand new way of working for IT. So FinOps becomes really important as part of your business case. You need to understand that. So you need to ensure you've got the right tools and processes to support that. And the second point I make is, in this day and age where there's real competition between the hyperscalers, of course there's discounts, of course people are trying to outprice each other. And one of the things I say to customers is just be careful about discounts today vanishing tomorrow. And what you really got to look at is this is a long-term bet. This is not a 2-year or 3-year bet. There should be no reason why you want to move away from that cloud, provided they're doing a decent job. And you've got to look at the pricing history and the pricing culture of the provider to really understand where you're going to be in 5 years' time. So the culture of the company that you're buying from is really important. And we say to customers, that's where for us, AWS and Amazon generally have demonstrated that sort of customer obsession they have, where they understand the importance of low price to a long-term relationship. So, business case is definitely important. It's certainly the first topic of conversation we tend to have when customers are asking. But very quickly afterwards, operational excellence. People expect things to run better today on cloud, which is really interesting because when we started our journey, it was always the opposite. We had to explain why it would be faster, why it had better capacity, why it was more secure. But today, that's the expectation, that all of the things will be better. And of course, they are better, right? But again, it comes down to management of that. So what we find is if you just do the same things on a hyperscaler as you do on premise, in effect, build like a data center in the sky, you're not really going to get much better outcomes because the problems with operations come from mistakes. And mistakes come from manual activity. So the key here is for operational excellence to really work, you've got to automate. So automation suddenly now becomes the key enabler of operational excellence. So high quality build. And for lots of enterprises, that's what they really want to see. Reliable, high quality builds that are consistent across all the environments, and that they know that when they say they're going to make a change, that exact change is what happens. And the consequence of automation, of course, is that things get done quicker. So you immediately get agility. So rather than what we see in the SAP world as some very long lag times between a request and delivery, with things like, for example, give me a copy of production. I want to try something out. Very common request in the world of SAP. Some companies can take 2 weeks to provide that. Whereas with an automated solution on AWS, that could be done in a matter of hours. And it could be self-service. So you can do it yourself rather than waiting for somebody else. And the big reason why agility is important is that it underpins innovation. So if you're able to try something yourself quickly and disposably, in other words, when you finish with that copy of production, you can then delete the system, stop paying for it. That's called failing fast. And failing fast is a key component to be able to try out ideas and to be able to innovate. So in an area where innovation can be difficult because, as we said earlier, CIOs are so protective about SAP and ERP specifically, if it's difficult to try out things, it's difficult to innovate. So we try to turn it on its head and say, we can make this a source of innovation rather than a blocker for innovation by having flexible infrastructure. And then what you can do, and this is the real golden nugget for us, and we see customers beginning to achieve this after running SAP on cloud for a while, is then you can start to hook your SAP systems into some of the more modern services that are available, from AWS natively, or from other providers, or from SAP with their SAP Cloud platform. And you can start to extend your business processes, you can extend your business data into additional services. Now, there's real value in that. And there's brand new use cases that people haven't even thought of yet today. So connecting voice to SAP, AI, chatbotting. I mean, there's a whole range of capabilities that are now very mature in the cloud world that SAP customers have really never even tried because it seems too difficult.
Yeah.
So we say to customers, look, when you're thinking about what if you should move and where you should move to, have a look at these criteria. Have a look at what you really want to try and achieve, and then let that be your guide to what to do next.
Yeah. No, it is interesting to sort of kind of hear the pace. Like you said, so many of these things that SAP customers, admins, experts never really, wasn't part of their world, right? This whole idea of infrastructure that might go away, or, experimentation, or, on-demand pricing, like those things just weren't relevant to their world. But like you said, if you put them in the right context, they may start to open up some new doors that, they were just like, wow, I never knew I could do those things. I'm curious, you talked a little bit about some of these things that now start to get added on as they get familiar with the cloud and so forth. One of the things that I saw that you guys put together, and I always like when people sort of lay out nice sort of journeys. What are typical journeys that people make from the earliest baby steps to more sophisticated things? You talked a little bit about things like FinOps. You talked about add-ons. Where do you find people? How do they adopt these journeys? I guess the thing that I'm sort of trying to get at is, do they tend to sort of follow it as, crawl, walk, run, and follow the 4 or 5 steps? Or do you find that it's like, we did the baby step and then immediately they want to add, something like chatbots or the voice integration, because there's got to be that thing that grabs somebody's attention and sort of show, like, how do you tend to find most customers work through their journey from what they used to do to now being in the cloud and the opportunities that opens up?
Yeah, I think, you're right. The journeys themselves can be a little different,
sure,
customer to customer, but certainly what we see, post migration, right? So obviously pretty much everybody starts the cloud journey with a migration, and there's always a little bit of nervousness. Okay, let's stabilize everything, but honestly, it's amazing how quickly that can happen. Mm-hmm. The stabilization. It's rare that you need more than a few days to iron out any stabilization issues, because the infrastructure is so good. Mm. And it's so easy to refresh it if you're unlucky enough to have something that's slightly odd. So that capability is a bit of an eye opener for customers, and they start seeing, immediately they start to see that agility even on stabilization. But once you're through the first phase of migration, what we see customers wanting to do is, try to improve that operations. I mentioned it's a very obvious thing to do. It nearly always starts with finance. They start because there's always a sense that, I can get more capacity, therefore give me more capacity if I need it. And then we're trying to ensure that they understand, okay, well, as part of your FinOps process, now you now have to not only pay for it, but you should also consider switching it off when you're finished with it. Mm-hmm. What's start-stop date? What are the up-down window times? And that begins to change. It has to ripple through not just the infrastructure team, but through the rest of the IT team, and even their change control boards, so that they start to recognize, we need to start asking different questions of the business users now. It's not a matter of just give me more. It's, we can give you more, but let's shape it to be optimal. So there's a little bit of time for FinOps to really flow through. SecOps becomes really important as well. Certainly as customers learn more about cloud, and they may be ahead of the SAP project, or the SAP project might be the first experience of IaaS, and the security controls and the processes and the ability to be flexible with security can be challenging for some people. So we often see, certainly in larger companies, that the security team because they may not understand how some of this is meant to work, are they people keeping everyone else back? And security needs to learn to run as fast as everybody else. Otherwise, you end up with you lose a lot of agility. So getting SecOps into more of an automated fashion is often a challenge as well. So you tend to work a little bit on the ops side of things, getting that out of the way. But from an actual value add point of view, we often see people look at data first, because it's actually a very easy one to knock in. Is getting data from SAP into something like S3 from AWS is such a simple thing to do. And you can even fill out the metadata catalog in Glue, which is the way they would do the metadata for a data lake. And you can generate a data lake in a matter of days that's getting fed from SAP. You can start to mix that data with publicly sourced data sources. So we saw one example with a large brewing company, and they mixed their manufacturing data from SAP from around the world with weather data that was publicly available, and they had some data scientists then run some Hadoop clusters with some ML models that they'd built to try and identify if they could spot any waste avoidance patterns. And they noticed that if it rained, historically, if it rained, I think it was somewhere between week 7 and week 10 of the barley growing cycle, that they recognized from the weather data that it would produce the wrong colored beer, and that beer would be wasted.
Right.
Now, that correlation was something you just cannot see in SAP, and you certainly can't see it in a spreadsheet. You need something much more powerful, but that can see it very simply. And with the right people, you can start releasing value out of your data that nobody had noticed before. So that's just a simple example of how you can very quickly start to take advantage of those more advanced capabilities. But where I get excited is when you start to challenge your own business processes, and you start to say to people, what can voice do? What can ML do? Vision? What can image recognition do for us? Customer sentiment, what can that do? And how can we build that into the way we do things? That becomes very much an industry-specific conversation, possibly even a customer-specific conversation. And it's very difficult to pick that off a shelf, but there's certainly the art of the possible conversations which really ought to be happening. And it only happens once you're in cloud. It's very difficult to even understand it when you're still on premise. So we always say to customers, like, the quicker you get there, the quicker you can start the journey on things that are going to make the biggest impact to your business. Yeah. Which will be around the processes and data.
Yeah, interesting. You had me at you're not going to screw up my beer, so I'm all in on the other things are cool too, but that's a big priority. When you own the platform, it's in your data center. You sort of own it. It's yours, lock, stock, and barrel, costs, maintenance, and so forth. You get into the cloud, and the cloud, AWS sort of famously says, "Hey, there's a shared responsibility here, right? We're responsible for certain things. You, the customer, are responsible for certain things." How do you see that playing out? Like you said, there is a lot of relearning that goes on, especially for SAP teams and so forth. Where do you tend to see that shared responsibility happen, and then what does Lemongrass tend to do to help make that success happen from the part that you own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it spans the shared responsibility model. Really started with security from AWS, and it was very important to spell it out so that they can give you all the tools to be secure. But if you decide to leave your ports wide open, that's on you, right? You've got to recognize the security problem with that. But it spans beyond security. It certainly goes into finance. It goes into things like architecting for availability, etc. But what we do, and our job is to take some of that responsibility on behalf of the customer. And we've got patterns that are proven, that are best practices that we know work really well, that will deal with some of those responsibilities, out of the box, so that when it comes to for example, high availability, cross availability zone, redundancy, etc. We can spin those things up really quickly because we know all the components that go into it. We've already built it, automated it, and it's ready to go at the press of a button. So we can help customers manage security, availability, and cost. There's always a layer, of course. We say to customers, you're always accountable fundamentally. You should never lose that accountability as a customer for security and for finance and for overall technical governance. We always recommend customers keep at least some capability in-house that can challenge us, because while we're a dedicated partner, and of course our business thrives on being a dedicated partner, we're still outside the customer's company ownership, right? So as a company, you always own your own data. You always are accountable fundamentally for securing that and for your own spend. So there's a minimum layer the customer needs to keep, but we can fulfill a lot of that shared responsibility on behalf of the customer.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's always, like you said, with so many people sort of learning what the cloud does, it's always good to have essentially kind of a Sherpa who's been there before, knows the good things to do, the things to avoid, and so forth. I want to be conscious of your time. You're very busy. Let me sort of wrap up with one last question. Best way for folks to engage with you guys? What's oftentimes the starting point? Have they sort of made up their decision? Are they looking for you to sort of help them with the financials of it? What's kind of the best way for folks to engage with your team, to get those early successes?
It starts just a couple of topics I've covered already today. So as you're beginning to look potentially even at, well, what's my application roadmap from an ERP point of view? What are my options? We absolutely get involved in that discussion. A lot of times customers are looking for the business justification to move to AWS or another hyperscaler. And we can show them that in the context of those 4 items I mentioned earlier: business case, operational excellence, agility, and innovation. We can help form those selection criteria for a customer. So when it comes to evaluation early on, we can do that. But of course, there's things that the customers start with, things like proof of concepts very quickly going with as well. We offer free proof of concepts. And then of course, customers might just want to get started. We even have some customers who have already migrated SAP to AWS, but need help to manage it. And we can jump in and take over those landscapes for them as well. Yeah.
And have you seen this ramp up somewhat during COVID, or things been about business as usual?
Well, for us, it's been business as usual. I mean, we've been growing quite well through COVID. I think for our customers, there's always a little bit of a mixed bag, depending on the industry, of course. Interestingly, though, generally speaking, we saw a little bit of a pause for some customers who were looking at migrating maybe in Q2 this year. But the vast majority of those then, maybe in Q3, took the foot off the brake and continued on with the path. So I get this. I suspect that there's still a little bit of wait and see. I think the long-term impact of COVID, I don't think we know yet.
Right.
But we do know what the end point is. The end point is everybody will move their SAP systems to a hyperscaler at some point, and it'll probably be done by 2027. So there's an S curve happening, and a delay this side of that S will just make the S a lot steeper. So we think there's less than 10% of SAP customers have moved their core systems to cloud. And as I said, I think that's going to be the vast majority will be done by 2027. So there's a mountain of work to get done, and whether it gets done today or it gets done in a couple of years' time, people will come back to it. What we try to say to customers, that COVID's a great time to do this stuff. If the business is a little quieter, it's an awesome time to make some changes and pick up some slack to address something that they're going to have to face inevitably.
Yeah, very, very good. 90% of the install base in basically 6 years. That's a big lift. It's a lot ahead of you. So, Eamonn, thank you so much for the time today. We learned a lot. It was good to kind of get reacquainted with what's going on in the SAP community. With that, I'm going to wrap it up for myself and for Aaron. Folks, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. We've been getting lots of new followers from around the world, so we appreciate that. Welcome to the Cloudcast community. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.